Any questions on the homework assignment from yesterday? What we're looking at today is parallelograms. Parallelograms. Now, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two sets of parallel lines. So any quadrilateral that contains two sets of parallel lines is going to be considered a parallelogram. And whenever we're defining figures, or especially quadrilaterals, we're going to use the most specific definition that we have. So if we're given a four-sided figure with two sets of parallel lines, we're not going to call it a quadrilateral, we're actually going to call it a parallelogram, because that's the most specific definition that we have. And the more information that we get, we'll call it by the more specific definition or term. So for a square, and when we get to it, if we have all the properties of a square, we're going to call it a square and not a parallelogram or a quadrilateral. But anytime that we do have a figure with two sets of parallel lines, it is called a parallelogram. Now, specifically with a parallelogram, if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite sides are congruent. So if it is a parallelogram, its opposite sides are congruent. So here, PQ and RS are going to be congruent. NQR and PS are congruent. And this is part of the properties of parallelograms. Head up, Tyler. We also have that the opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. So in a parallelogram, the opposite sides and opposite angles are going to be congruent to each other. And it's going to work for any and all parallelograms. So when we look at this here we have a parallelogram. And because it's a parallelogram, we know that the opposite sides are congruent. So these two sides are going to be congruent, and these two here.
So x is 3. Or no, x is 7. I thought those were x, sorry.
And we also have that the opposite angles are congruent. So we can say that x plus 4 is equal to 12, because those two lengths are going to be congruent. And we can also say what? Y is? Because the opposite angles are congruent. Well, y equals 65. That's already done. Now to solve for the value of x, we can subtract 4 from both sides, which tells us x is equal to, and that's it. Any questions on this here? Let's look at this one here. Now, because it is a parallelogram, we know that the opposite sides are going to be congruent. And we also know that the opposite angles are congruent. So to find the values of x and y, well, we know that 2x is going to equal, and 3y minus 1 is y minus 1 is going to equal.
X is 27.
And how did you find the value of x?
Divide 54 by 2.
We divide both sides by 2, telling us x is 27.
Okay.
Over here we would add 1 to both sides, which will tell us that 3y is equal to 21. divide both sides by 3, and y is equal to
7.
Any questions on this here? Since the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, GF would be 8. Since the opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent, G would be 60. They did. Any questions on any of this here? I think y'all feel pretty comfortable with. So 2x would equal 50.
Yeah, ML would be 50.
So, and then y plus 3 is 18. Minus 3, telling us y is equal to. Any questions on any of this here? Now, the consecutive interior angle theorem states that if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the consecutive interior angles are supplementary. They add together to be 180. It works out that for a parallelogram, that the consecutive angles, the angles next to each other in a parallelogram, are actually going to be supplementary. They're going to add together to be 180. So all of these sets of angles, it's just a different setup for it. Will add together to be 180. So any of the angles next to each other in a parallelogram will add together to be 180 degrees. They could be. Yep. Now, we also have that the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. They cut each other in half. So the consecutive interior angles of a parallelogram are supplementary, and the diagonals bisect each other. And they will all add together to be 360, yes. So angle V and 80 will add together to be 180. So we can call this y. So if we set it up, we could say that y plus 80 is equal to 180 degrees. Now to get the value of y by itself, we would subtract 80 from both sides. So y is 100. So it tells us that this angle here is 100. Any questions on how we found that? What would the other two angles be?
80 and 100.
Which one would be 80?
W. X.
And if we did add all four of these together, we would get,
360.
because the sum of the interior angles of any four-sided figure is 360. And that's it. Questions on this here? How about this one here? 98 degrees, because the opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. M and K.
It would be,
Because we know that these two angles add together to be 180. So what we could do is we could take 180 and subtract 92 from it to find the missing angle. And if we do 180 minus 92, we get it's not 92, because this should be, because 180, and this should be 98, which would give us 82. I think I was getting ahead of myself with the 2. If I'm not paying attention, I'll end up writing the answer down instead of the number I'm supposed to be. Any questions on this here? We feel comfortable with this? Okay. We'll move on to this one here. This one here is a little bit different, but not by a whole lot. What is the measure of angle Y? Because the opposite angles, Y and W, are opposite angles, so they would add together, not add together, but they would be congruent. Now, the whole angle X and the whole angle V would be 120. But we do know that Y and X both add together to be 180, yes?
Yes.
But, guys, focus up here. Angle X and angle V are both split, they're cut. Now they're not bisected, they're not cut evenly, but we do know that our missing angle, we'll call it X, plus 52 plus 60 is equal to 180. So, really, focus up here. Now we can combine our like terms, 60 and 52, which would be is equal to 180. And from here we can subtract 112 from both sides, telling us X is equal to 68. So this here is 68 degrees. Which part? Here or here? This would be 68, and this one here would be. Any questions on this here? E would be 55. What do we know of this side of angle B? 62. And it's really working off of our alternate interior angles because of those parallel lines. That's actually part of the reason why we can say that. Now, we know that these three angles here add together to be 180. So we can say X plus 55 plus 62 is equal to 180. Now 55 plus 62 is 117. How to find the value of X we would? Subtract 117 from both sides. X is 63, exactly. So our two missing angles are 63 and 63 degrees. And that's it. Well, the next one might be considered a catch. Are you ready for the next one? Find the missing angle. What do we know about consecutive interior angles in a parallelogram? They add together to be 180. So we can say that 9x plus 15 plus 6x plus 15 is equal to 180. Now we can combine our like terms. 9x plus 6x is 15x. And 15 plus 15 is 30 is equal to 180. Then we can minus 30 from both sides, telling us that x is equal to and lastly we would divide both sides by 15, telling us that x is equal to 10. Now we want to find the missing angles, so we'll need to just plug it back in. So we can say 9 times 10 plus 15. Well, 9 times 10 is, and 90 plus 15 is, so this angle here is 105. What do we think the other angle should be? 75. Because these two angles should add together to be 180, and we can check it and say 6 times 10 plus 15. Well, 6 times 10 is, and 60 plus 15 is, well, that also means that this angle x is 5 and w is 105. And that's it. Questions on this here? Find the missing measures. Now they tell us that Km, the whole segment, is 23.4 units. Now we know what we know about the diagonals of a parallelogram is that they bisect each other. And anytime we talk about figures bisecting, it means that they are being cut in half. So we know those two segments are congruent. So if the whole segment is 23.4, what do I need to do to find one of the halves? Divide by 2. So we can take 23.4 and divide it by 2. So Ym is this here is 11.7 and this here would be 11.7. And that's it. We ready for the next one? Okay, they tell us that RT is 19.8, and we want to find we can multiply it by 2 because both segments are going to be 19.8. So RP is 39.6. Any questions on this here?
I think we got it, man.
All right. So this one here, we want to find the value of x. Now they tell us that UH is 19 and that FH, the whole length, is 5x minus 7. Well, what is the value of the whole length? 19 plus 19, because these would be congruent. And 19 plus 19 is 38. So what that tells me is that 5x minus 7 is equal to do it first. Add 7 to both sides, which tells me that 5x is equal to
21.
and then we would divide both sides by 5. X is equal to 9. So x is equal to 9. And that's it. Questions on this here? And I believe we have one last one, and that one's this here. Now they tell us that KU is 3x plus 3. And UM is, now what do we know about these two segments? They're equal to each other. So we can just set these two equations. 3x plus 3 equals 4x minus 4. So what can we do first? We can do what? Unfortunately, we don't have any like terms because of the equal sign.
Subtract 3x from both sides. Yeah.
So we'll subtract 3x from both sides to move it from one side of the equal sign to the other. 3x minus 3x would be 0, so 3 is equal to x minus 4. And now we would add 4 to both sides, telling us that x is equal to 7. It didn't ask for it, but if we wanted to, we could plug it back in to see what each length is. So we could say 3 times 7 minus 3. Well, 3 times 7 is 21, and 21 plus 3. Yep. And that would be 24. And if we did it with the other equation, 4 times 7 minus 4, 28 minus 4 is 24. And as we wanted it, we needed them both to be the same. So they would both be 24, which means we do have the correct answer. Questions on this here?
No, sir.
And that's it. That is all we are doing for today, so you can use the rest of the time to work on the assignment.